Bruce, I'm delighted to see your book freshly off the print, newly minted, and I know the feeling of having a new book. Congratulations.
Well, it's exciting for me. I saw it in physical form for the first time last night, and it was a very special moment, I must say.
Lovely. I've just been reading through it over the last 2 weeks, and I must say I have enjoyed it immensely. And I just say to myself, if only I had this book, 50 years ago, and especially before going to live in Athens. I went there in 1987, and I feel in a way that I've been following in your footsteps.
Oh, well.
So you got there a bit first in the early 60s.
Not quite. In the mid 70s.
The mid 70s.
Well, no, wait a second. As a child, in 1970 and 1972.
Yeah.
And then as a teenager in 1976.
Yes, yeah. Well, I would have been around very much around the same time. I was working on the buildings in Munich during the year of the Olympics, 1972. The events that happened in the Munich Olympics, 1972, and then I flew to Athens in 1972, which of course was still under the Colonels.
Indeed, yes.
So it's very hard for people now to realise what the implications of that were.
Yes, indeed.
And, the birthplace of democracy.
Yes.
And here they had a dictatorship with tanks,
yes.
picture of a tank coming down from their parliament building.
Yes.
We have the mother of parliaments, but this in a sense was a parliament in the mother of democracy.
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's been fascinating reading your book this year, especially because just last month we had the anniversary of Salamis.
Indeed.
Here in this part of the world we're celebrating 100 years since 1921. Big events, but in Greece they were celebrating 2,500 years since the Battle of Salamis.
Yes, indeed.
And if things had gone differently, we might now be talking in Persian.
Indeed. Yes. And under a different regime. Maybe.
Yes. But it's also been, last month was also a very, very evocative month in Greece, because at the beginning of the month, the Salamis anniversary I think was on the 29th, but on the 2nd of September was a major event in Greek culture, because the great composer Mikis Theodorakis passed away at the age of 96. And I was just thinking, my goodness, what that man has lived through, and that's in your book.
Indeed, yes.
Many things.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I went to Greece. I don't know if that was your case, but when I went to Greece, the world stopped with the arrival of Alexander the Great.
Yes, indeed, absolutely.
Nothing happened after Alexander the Great.
You're right, absolutely.
And as regards Athens, when Alexander the Great came along, that was curtains really for Athens in many ways, because the centre of gravity moved off to Alexandria and then moved off to Constantinople, and Athens started a long decline. Obviously there were revivals under Hadrian and the like, but Athens never really recovered.
And yet it was Athenian culture that was being exported.
Exactly.
The Athenian culture that was brought to Afghanistan, present-day Afghanistan, by Alexander's people, and that created a kind of Indo-Greek fusion, as one of my friends called it. But it's extraordinary that Athens remained a kind of creator of culture and wisdom long after it ceased to have any real geopolitical weight.
Sure, yeah. And we think as well, in the West, that Athens was affecting people to the west up there, but it also had huge influence. I remember in Delhi going to the museum there and seeing the sculptures, which had obviously been influenced by Greek sculpture. So the influence of Athens, in the Arab world, for example.
Absolutely.
The translations, in some cases, the translations went, from Greek into Syriac, from Syriac into Arabic in places like Baghdad, and then came back to the West and came into Latin in Spain in many cases, and then from there back into the Western languages.
Indeed, yes.
But the centre really is Athens.
Yes, indeed, yes. And Athens became nothing more than a hamlet at times, but the Acropolis always remained important.
Yes.
The Acropolis was always an important strategic place, and it was always a holy place as well. That never ceased.
Yes. It's very hard for people. I know on my first arrival in 1972, coming in from the old airport in Ellinikon, which is now abandoned and about to become a big development for people who want a lovely seaside place to live in. But coming in, there was this enormous conical mountain. And I had never heard of this conical mountain, Lykavitos, because it was outside the limits of ancient Athens.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And of course, it gave its name ultimately to the Lyceum.
Yes, indeed.
But it was actually outside the bounds of the ancient city, and therefore it wasn't on the maps in our textbooks of ancient Greek history.
Indeed. Yes.
Athens, it's ancient Athens itself, even though it was a very, very important city-state, it was a huge city-state in Greek terms,
Indeed,
it was still tiny.
Indeed.
So you could walk around the perimeter of it, of most of it. In
you could, absolutely, yes. But I mean, the other mountains of Attica do feature in history. I mean, Imitos, Hymettus, Pendelikon, Pendeli, Egalio.
Yes. And Parnitha.
Indeed, absolutely.
Which is huge. It's really a range.
Indeed,
yes.
absolutely.
So when you're living in Athens, you are really surrounded by high mountains, and your movement is very restricted. If you want to get to see the rest of Greece, there are very few passageways out of it, and certainly on arrival there, you need to be aware that there's only a certain way of getting from A to B.
Indeed,
and there might be a large mountain in your way otherwise.
Yes. But these mountains have been a benign presence in Athenian history, with the marble from Pendelikon, with the honey from Hymettus, Imitos. They are benign protective presence.
Yes. Well, it's a place full of memories. I remember I was there during the years of Nephos. And Nephos is a word which very, very thankfully has now ceased to be so much in people's vocabulary, but it meant smog.
Indeed.
Phenomenal urban smog, because Athens had, in a country of 11 million people, it had getting on towards 4.5 million people, and it had huge industry. An awful lot of the industry in the country was within those mountains.
Indeed.
And a huge proportion of the automobiles in Greece were within those mountains. And these were cars from another era.
Indeed.
They were cars that you would love to see in Ireland, because they were from they were antiques in many cases, but perfectly preserved because there was no rust in the atmosphere. But they belched out enormous amounts of fumes. It was better not to be parked behind them.
And luckily the metro did, at a stroke, immensely improve the atmosphere. But I'm sorry to say that the atmosphere is still getting a bit sort of smokier than one would like on still days. I remember in my days as a young reporter in the 80s, I would, if I could manage it, I would go to some nice island at the weekend. And I remember sort of the ferry chugging out of Piraeus, and you would actually see the visible brown cloud.
Oh, yes.
And that is much, much better now. I mean, Athens is again purple crowned, as it should be.
Yes. Well, looking at Athens from an airplane is actually an excellent educational experience, because you can see, for example, between the Acropolis and the sea, what some of the most densely populated parts of this globe.
Yes,
where
indeed,
people where people arrived.
Yes, indeed.
You tell the story, Bruce.
Well, yes. I mean, the really dense population of the greater Athens area happened in the 1920s and 30s, when a great wave of mostly destitute people came from, in Greek parlance, Asia Minor. And some brought some savings, others didn't, and accommodation had to be found for them very quickly. And something like, not quite shanty towns, but very makeshift accommodation was created for them. But those places were very quickly turned into sort of bustling and sort of socially thriving and politically militant parts of the town.
Yes, it was a very strange experience, because coming from Ireland, say, to Athens, we think Athens must have been the very most cultured place, but actually the people arriving from Smyrna, they had been in Fior di Levante. They were in the beautiful city of Smyrna, and they arrived in this what to them was a very uncultivated place at the time, and brought their culture with them.
Yes. And as you'll have seen, I mean, I devote some space to the extraordinary sociological research done by René Hirschhorn in the 70s in Kokkinia, which was a refugee district of Piraeus, which was a great mixture of things. I mean, it was quite poor, but nonetheless sort of proud and independent people, with a lot of people with their own small businesses. There was a strong left-wing culture, which at the time was largely underground because it was the colonel's regime, but also a very high incidence of devotion to Orthodox Christianity, and as she found, a very sophisticated understanding of the rituals and sacraments and obligations of the Orthodox Christian. And she found that her friends in Kokkinia were able to explain to her the rules around hospitality, the rules around care for the bereaved, the rules around death and funerals, and in very sophisticated theological terms. I mean, so it was both, in some ways, a very conservative community, and in other ways, a very progressive and militant community.
Yes, yeah. It's very hard for us to realise just how small Piraeus was. Piraeus is now the biggest port in the eastern Mediterranean. A lot of it has been taken over by the Chinese. But when the Greek state was formed, Piraeus was nothing.
Indeed.
In the middle of the 1830s, Piraeus was a handful of people.
Yes, indeed.
Isn't there an extraordinary chemistry between Ireland, with its foot in the Atlantic, and Greece? There are so many connections.
Yes, many strands of connection. Yes. I mean, even a sort of little-known local one, a man called Edward Law, born here in Rostrevor.
Was he really?
Absolutely, indeed.
I didn't know that about him. Yes.
And he gives his name to Eduardo Law Street.
Lambda Omega,
exactly,
I think it is.
Yes. So he gets a street in central Athens named after him. And he was a member of the Financial Commission, wasn't he, that looked after Greece in the sort of late 1890s, and he was felt to have done a good job.
This was the kind of predecessor of the IMF.
You might say. Yes. But he settled in Athens, and I think he's buried in the first cemetery, so he's considered sort of an adopted son of Greece, really. And,
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's for an Irish person going to Athens, it explains so many things. Say, for example, around the centre of Dublin, the beautiful St. Stephen's Church, for example, which is a lovely example of the neoclassical style, and it's made up of three of the most important buildings in Athens. You have part of it is from the Erechtheion, which is up on the Acropolis, and part of it then, the middle part of it is from the Tower of the Winds, which is from the Roman era.
Indeed, yeah.
And then the top of it is from the monument of Lysicrates.
Indeed, yeah.
Which is right in the Plaka.
Gosh, indeed, yeah.
Right under Anaphiotica.
Absolutely, yes. The two gems of Plaka, which were always visible to visitors. Yes, gosh, indeed, yes. Yes, I was intrigued by the way that, through the late Ottoman period, Hellenism became something to be possessed, initially in the form of models and designs and measurements. And so, you had travellers from all over Western Europe who thought that by very, very carefully mapping out and measuring, the precise proportions of the classical monuments, and then bringing them home and then reproducing them, they could actually bring the power of the Greek spirit back to their own countries. And then, of course, that spirit of going to Greece and taking something away and using it to advantage, that reached its apotheosis in Elgin, of course. And then it was reversed, in a manner of speaking, in the early years of Greek independence, when neoclassicism was actually sort of re-exported back to Greece. Neoclassicism with a slight German flavour.
Yes. Well, near where I'm living, just in the suburbs of Dublin, there's a beautiful Rathfarnham Castle, which has, one of the best examples of a ceiling by James Athenian Stewart.
Indeed,
And the whole castle is now it's been restored extensively by the Office of Public Works, by the state.
Indeed,
and it's a wonderful example of classicism coming to Ireland.
Indeed,
Dublin has so many examples of that.
Yes. That pair of late Ottoman travellers, Stewart and Rivette, who did exquisite drawings and very, very precise work of the antiquities of Athens, and really profoundly influenced the taste of these islands.
Sure. You see it all around Ireland, in the centre of Dublin. You see it in Carlow. You see it all around the place.
Indeed.
And ultimately, as you say, it goes back to their drawings on these enormous, large elephantine-sized volumes. Amazing.
Another maybe underestimated sort of Irish Balkan link is J.D. Butcher, the Times correspondent.
Very much in your own area of work.
Indeed, very much indeed, yes. Well, he has a number of things in common with me. I mean, he worked for the Times of London. He was really happiest in the Balkans. He really fell in love with the Balkans, I think, when he met Venizelos in Crete as a young revolutionary. And he had wonderful sort of moonlit rides over the mountains with the young Venizelos as a revolutionary. And then, of course, when Venizelos came to take control of Greek affairs in 1910 or so in Athens, you can see Butcher sort of at his side on the balcony often. And I don't want to push the parallel too far, because as far as I remember, I've never actually stitched together an alliance of states to wage war, and that's what Butcher did, more or less. I mean, he negotiated the...
He was a real mover and shaker.
He was, absolutely, yes, indeed.
So he was around in Crete at a time when Crete had a measure of autonomy.
Yes, indeed.
And one of my earliest memories in childhood is a stamp collection which my mother had got from her father.
Yes.
And it had a very strange stamp on it, which seemed to have the letters KPHTH. And I had never come across a language which had KPHTH, but this was the Greek way of spelling Crete.
Indeed, of course, absolutely,
So they were issuing their own stamps around that time in the 1890s.
Absolutely,
So that would have been the period before Crete joined on to the rest of Greece. The other strange Irish connection, which people are not that much aware of, is a brief period when one Oscar Wilde went on his holidays.
Is that right? Yes. Well, gosh, indeed.
I think it was April 1877.
Gosh, I had no idea. So what witty things did he have to say?
Well, he was there. He actually took time off from his university education. He had started off life in Portora.
Oh, indeed,
and learned a fantastic amount of Greek.
Indeed, yes, very good ancient Greek scholar. Yes,
Oscar Wilde. People are not aware of the fact that Oscar Wilde's Greek was superb.
Indeed, yes. Well, the famous story about the exam when he was given the 27th chapter of the Book of Acts, the shipwreck of St. Paul, which is quite difficult Greek.
It's full of shipping terminology.
Shipping terms, and he translated away, and then he went beyond the point where he was asked to translate. He said, "But I'm so excited, I want to know what happens next."
Yes, he went there with Mahaffy.
Is that right?
And Mahaffy had been the big name in ancient history and indeed in papyrology. He was also very closely connected to Schliemann, the excavator of Troy and of Mycenae.
Yes, indeed.
And they went to see the treasure which Schliemann had excavated from Mycenae when they were in Athens.
Indeed, gosh, well, indeed, yes. One of the sort of cultural trends in the late 19th century was that the great sort of German Teutonic benefactors of Athens sort of acquired a more sort of Hellenic local tinge themselves. I mean, Schliemann being one such character, who built himself a palace in Athens, which still stands as, a very prominent feature of central Athens. Beautiful and sort of, slightly gaudy, but actually magnificent in its own way, and he was a magnificent and sort of outrageous character, wasn't he?
It's now the numismatic museum.
Indeed, yes.
If you want to see little gems of perfection, look at Greek coins. They are something really, really magnificent. And they too came to Ireland.
Yes,
because in 1928, W.B. Yeats was chairing a committee to decide on the new coinage for the Irish Free State, as it was, and chose coins which were from an Athenian colony called Thurii in Magna Graecia in the south of Italy. And we had those some parts of those coins until we joined the euro in 2002.
But as far as I can see, in the 19th century, you have a rich sort of Anglo-Irish connection with Greece. Butcher, of course, is one example. He came from Limerick, by the way. There was Aubrey de Vere, who was also from that part of the world, a landowner, a kind of Newmanite sort of high churchman, who had some very kind of powerful mystical experiences on the Acropolis. And then, of course, Sir Richard Church playing such a part in the Greek uprising, and our local friend here, Edward Law. But then in the 20th century, even early 21st century, it's been a more direct, dare I say, Irish Street connection. And the one that interests me most is probably the Heaney connection with Greece. And, of course, the almost accidental fact that he was in Greece when he heard the news of the Nobel Prize. But that kind of sealed his connection with the Peloponnese, didn't it?
Yes, very much. I arrived in Athens on my first posting there in 1987, and one of the first things I had to attend, this was no difficulty for me, was to attend the launching by Melina Mercouri as Minister for Culture of the replica of the ancient Athenian trireme.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Which was a magnificent occasion, and all of the commercial and navy came out to celebrate it, and it became a ship of the Greek navy.
Indeed, yes.
And it went all the way to Australia, I think, for the Olympic Games.
Yes.
But this was something very, very special. And I know that rowing has a very particular echo for you in your family.
It does. I mean, well, my brother rowed for Cambridge, so yes. And my brother actually also rowed in one of Tim Severin's expeditions, recreating Jason and the Argonauts. So yes, there's a bit of rowing in the family. And my father rowed in an expedition recreating the voyage of St. Columkill. So yes, we've done, and I rowed in a very, very amateur way at school. So yes, we've done a bit of rowing. We pulled an oar or two. Kopi lassier, as you say in Greek.
So Athens, the whole power of Athens was based on its navy.
Indeed,
It was up against the Spartans, who were really the power on land. But Athens' strength was its ships. And even today in modern Greek, the word for service means serving under the oars. The citizens, means going under an oar.
Yes,
it paints a whole picture for people.
Indeed, yes. And Athens really has to be an extrovert power, because it can never be self-sufficient in food. It will always need to import food. So it must therefore, have a robust fleet itself, or at least be in alliance with somebody who has a robust fleet.
Yes. And a lot of the grain for the large population in Athens came from the Black Sea.
Yes, indeed.
So they were they would have been passing by what was then Byzantion, which later changed its name twice. But the source of their major grain supply came from very, very far away, so they had to dominate the waters.
Yes, indeed. And I think the theory of Thucydides as to why the Athenians were energetic is actually quite sophisticated. That Attica is fertile, but not too fertile. I mean, you can produce some good wine and olives there, but never enough grain to feed people. And really, Athens' net export to the world is cleverness, it's wisdom.
Yes, and philosophy.
Indeed, yes. And that was
and theatre.
Theatre, exactly,
People might be amazed to know that Athens has the highest number of theatres of any city in the world.
Yes, indeed.
It's a thriving place for theatre.
Yes, indeed. Yes. I mean, in a way, one of my sort of exciting recent modern experiences of Athens was going to a book launch, a launch of the Greek translation of a book by two young women journalists who'd worked in Brussels, and they had written a very, very detailed account of the Euro crisis, or the Grexit crisis, from a Greek perspective. And the launch was in the Benaki Library Division, which is on Piraeus Avenue, so the newly created space, which has about 400 seats, and every single one was filled. And there was an extremely intense cerebral discussion between the chairman, Alexis Papakilas, who's the editor of Kathimerini newspaper, and the two young authors, and a panel of quite distinguished people. And the 400 people were transfixed. And I've never seen such a vigorous but highly fine-grained and cerebral debate. It was really holding the audience in absolute raptures, and I thought, something about ancient Athens is still alive here.
Yes. It was very strange for us in Ireland, because we went through nothing remotely as difficult as the Greek people did.
Indeed,
but there were some similarities, and one of our politicians didn't do himself any favours by saying that he made reference to this was something like feta. It didn't go down well. There was no fellow feeling, really.
Indeed,
and particularly given that the main export from Ireland to Greece of indigenous things is of cheese.
Indeed,
Kerrygold regatta,
that's right.
Which you can't buy in Ireland for some reason. They make too much of it and make so much money out of it, exporting it to Greece.
Indeed, yes.
But no, it was. I remember on the first occasion when I saw somebody peering into a bin looking for food. This was appalling.
Indeed, absolutely appalling.
And this was not something which was anybody could have dreamt of really prior to that. People were not very well off, but they certainly weren't starving.
Indeed, absolutely, yes.
But that all changed.
Yes, that was a feature of Greece and Athens when we first saw it. Athens was a city where every district was safe. There were poorest districts, but it was always safe, and everybody was sort of more or less able to feed themselves. And I think, entering the Eurozone actually created huge inequality, didn't it, at an everyday level? I mean, it was because before the Euro was introduced, it was possible to live on a very, very few drachmas a day if you consumed only local products. And suddenly, that possibility was taken away. and there was a long Greek expression for a very simple thing, strongylopisi προς τα πάνω, rounding up, which meant that sort of the prices of all sort of small petty things were rounded up. And suddenly the price of a cup of coffee or a short taxi ride became actually
just out of people's reach.
Yes.
I was actually at the event where it was announced that Greece was going to join as kind of paddy last, if you'll excuse the expression. They joined into the Euro scheme at the very, very last minute. And of course the preparations hadn't been done. There wasn't sufficient preparation for it, and I think that was most unfortunate, really. And then people just didn't have the experience of paying back a mortgage.
Indeed, yes.
Mortgages were something which were really out of most people's reach. People simply saved up for a house, or they built, as people who went to Greece on their holidays knew, all these pieces of steel sticking up from buildings. That was for the next story, and the next story.
Yes. But I would still maintain that joining the Euro could have been an opportunity for Greece. It could have been an opportunity to put things on a sounder fiscal footing and to really, really stabilise the Greek economy. Unfortunately, the temptation to spend was too high, wasn't it?
Yes. I remember being in the town of Veria and looking round, and there were so many shops selling Rolex watches.
Yes,
there were so many expensive cars. But people really didn't have the track record. So the idea of a bank lending out vast amounts of money to people who had no track record.
Yes, indeed,
The blame, to my mind, was with the banks.
And then the people who suffered the worst in the crash weren't usually the people who had done best in the boom. There were people who were already doing quite badly, and with the crash they just were annihilated. Which is and I was lucky enough in my recent sojourns in Athens to just sort of be coming at the time when confidence was returning, and in Monastiraki, where I was living, you could feel that life was coming back into the streets. And a certain cosmopolitan flavour was coming back into the streets, which had never been a feature of Athens in the past. But to have these wonderful sort of Japanese fusion restaurants and lots of Athenians who've lived abroad and then brought maybe cuisine styles or boutique styles back to Athens. I mean, the Athens I lived in quite a lot through 2018, 2019 was actually a culturally very interesting place, and still visibly wounded, but nonetheless recovering in interesting ways.
Yes. It's a wonderful city for experiencing culture. The idea of going to the Herodes Atticus, the Odeon,
absolutely,
built as a concert hall, and still being used as a concert hall.
Indeed, very much.
And so to attend an event there is something that we just can't imagine.
Yes, indeed. Anyway, and in some degree, it brings you back to the experience of the ancient Greek theatre goer, doesn't it?
And similarly, an awful of people in Athens nowadays go to attend, performances in Epidaurus, which is easy to get to nowadays.
Absolutely.
But obviously a bit down the road. In ancient times it would have been much more difficult to get there.
Absolutely, yes.
One of the stranger connections between Ireland and Greece has to do with the more recent history, and it relates to Brendan Behan.
Indeed, yes. Now I'm somewhat familiar with this, but anyway, please.
Well, it's a very strange story. You couldn't invent it if you tried. Indeed, but Brendan Behan died in 1964 and had an enormous funeral. It was said to be the biggest funeral after that of Michael Collins.
Indeed, yes.
But strangely, he had written at the age of 12 or 13 a little poem called The Laughing Boy.
Yes, indeed, yes.
And then he wrote in the 1950s, he was commissioned to write a play in Irish.
Indeed,
and there was no tradition in Irish of theatre. It was something that had passed us over. There was no Gaelic tradition of theatre whatsoever. He wrote a one-act play called Ungil, and it went down extremely well.
Indeed, yes.
I think he wrote it at the last moment.
Yes.
But it was it went down very, very well, and then he was encouraged to translate it into English, but it wasn't long enough, so he needed to flesh it out a bit. So he reached into his bottom drawer and he found this poem, and that play became very successful in East Stratford.
Yes.
And went on then to a festival of theatre, of English language theatre in Paris.
Indeed,
where a certain Mikis Theodorakis happened to be living at the time.
Yes, indeed,
one of the crucial linking pieces was that a translator called Vasilis Rotas, who had translated the whole of Shakespeare,
Is that right?
translated this song from the teenage being
Indeed,
into
yes,
magnificent Greek.
Indeed, absolutely, yes.
And then Theodorakis took this and made a wonderful, wonderful melody.
Yes,
out
indeed,
of it.
yes.
And
indeed.
that was before there was any talk of Zorba the Greek.
Indeed,
This is early 60s.
Yes, indeed, absolutely, yes.
And that song then was
before Zorba the Greek had become a world famous thing.
Before, absolutely,
yes.
absolutely, yes. So this was early 60s.
Indeed,
and the music for Enas Omid, in Greek it's called a hostage.
Indeed,
because in Greek if you say the hostage, it means Homer.
Homer the poet.
It means Homer the poet.
Exactly,
So that's why it's called a hostage in Greek.
Yes.
So that the music for that play was reused then. Theodorakis' music was banned. As was Shakespeare under the Colonels.
Absolutely.
And he managed to smuggle out instructions. He was under house arrest in the middle of nowhere in the Peloponnese. He managed to smuggle out instructions on what music should be used for the wonderful film called Z or Z.
Is that right? Yes.
So the music that you hear in Z, which is a film that everybody should see,
indeed,
is actually a rehash of the music for Enas Omidos, the hostage.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I won't give too much away, but I think a very interesting film is being made sort of as we speak about the Theodorakis-Bion connection.
Excellent.
I mean, what I bring out in the book is the extraordinary moment of the funeral of George Seferis, Nobel laureate, in 1971, which turns into a kind of spontaneous rendering of what became the sort of unofficial Greek national anthem. This quite cerebral and not especially political poem by Seferis, which is magnificently set to music by Theodorakis. And somehow, although the crowd was singing off tune, it was a very, very moving moment. And at a time when the music couldn't be performed, nonetheless people could still croon to Theodorakis at a funeral procession, and that was it made a very powerful statement.
Yes. Well, just a few weeks ago at Theodorakis' funeral, which was in Crete, in his ancestral village, Galatas, the crowd broke into song. And what were they singing?
Go on.
The Laughing Boy.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well.
Words by Brendan Beattie, translated by Vasilis Rodas, and it's some of Theodorakis' most magnificent music.
Indeed,
and it inspired a whole generation of people, and it was associated with the ridding of the Colonel's regime. I only read the other day that when Greece was applying for membership of what was then the European Economic Community, where did the letter go?
Go on.
To Garrett Fitzgerald.
Oh well, yes,
who happened to be the foreign minister
of
a member state that had recently joined. It was in the mid 70s.
Well, indeed,
and Ireland had joined, obviously with the UK and Denmark in 1973. So who would ever have guessed that Greece would be now a thriving and enthusiastic member of the EU.
Indeed,
because for many years under Papandreou there was no enthusiasm for
I mean, there was kind of there was
skepticism as regards.
You're right, exactly. Yes, indeed.
Whereas our nearest large island here is no longer with us in the EU.
Well,
unfortunately.
Yes, indeed. Well, about the trireme, I mean, I think we should say in fairness that this was an undertaking by some British
from Cambridge University.
Indeed, yes, but in very amicable collaboration with Greek counterparts.
Very much, yes.
And I think, and they were generous with their knowledge, and I think the Greek Navy has been the happy beneficiary, and a lot has been learned about the behaviour of triremes at sea. How they behave under sail, under oars, the speeds you can attain, because we've never found any trace of a trireme. What we have found is ship sheds, and that's very exciting. Because that tells you, the challenge that they had of storing the triremes, these magnificent ships, was almost as great as the challenge of building them.
And preserving them from various sea animals as well.
Indeed, yes, absolutely, yes. Those mollusks are very, very, very deadly. In fact, I was talking to a Danish archaeologist friend the other day, but the most recent sort of finds of ship sheds apparently pertain to the pre-Salamis era, and indeed they may pertain to the pre-Salamis naval build-up, which is the one that was so controversially advocated by Themistocles. In a sense, it's really part of the history of democracy. I mean, how Themistocles used his rhetorical powers to insist that the new silver mine discovered in Athens should be diverted not to handouts but to building up a navy.
Right, extraordinary. Well, that's the extraordinary thing about Athens, is that the past is there with you.
Indeed,
A lot of the intermediate period, if you go to Rome, there's been building going on all the time. But in Athens' case, you have the ancient city, and then you have Byzantine churches, but you have the modern city plonk on top of it. A lot of modern architecture, and in recent years, in the 60s you would have had, for example, the American Embassy as a building by Gropius, one of his latest works.
Indeed,
the Hilton Hotel.
Indeed.
The joke about the Americans up on the Acropolis, a wonderful view here of the Hilton Hotel.
Indeed, yes. But that in itself is an architectural monument, isn't it?
Yes, very much. And then in more recent years, the wonderful new Acropolis Museum, which is an outstanding, one of the most beautiful museums in the world. And then the Stavros Niarchos Foundation down near the Hippodrome, near Falerno.
Yes. I mean, my final chapter sort of explaining the exuberance, the fragile exuberance of the recovery of Athens from the crisis. I mean, those new cultural centres were very much part of a reflowering of Athens, along with other more human things. I mean, I was intrigued by the taste of middle-class Greek youngsters for Greek African rap. Now I thought, that's something new, and I actually got to know a Greek African rapper, who used to perform with great aplomb in one of the clubs in Gazi, and he had very witty and astute things to say about the urban development in places like Metaxourgio. So it's a place of all kinds of unexpected things.
When you're in Athens and you look up at the mountains, one of the stranger things you see, for example, on top of Pendeli or Imitos, the mountain famed for honey.
Yes, indeed.
It's alive with radio antennae and telephone antennae, but also with military equipment.
Yes, I mean, I was conscious of the great promise of Athens, but also the ecological frailty as well. I mean, the fact, and we've seen in the last few weeks. I mean, we've seen
flooding last night on the television.
Very much, absolutely, yes. I mean, very much related to the terrible fires of August, and the fact that mountainsides were denuded, and the long-standing fact that some of the rivers in Athens have been covered over. Too many of them have been covered over.
Right outside the Irish Embassy, you have the Ilissos.
Yes, indeed.
Right beside the old Kali Marmaro Stadium, which was restored, the ancient stadium, which was the site, for example, during the 2004 Olympics of the marathon race, which comes to an end in that stadium. So there was a huge river underneath there, and it rears its head. In the last few days, I think it has.
Indeed, yes. Terrible floods as we speak in Athens, and the rivers were the joys of Athens. In the age of Socrates, there are lovely lyrical descriptions of paddling in the stream and enjoying all the the nymphs that were in the atmosphere,
and the sound of frogs.
The sound of frogs, exactly.
Which I have heard myself down in the Keramikos.
Yes. So I mean, Attiki has been always greatly blessed by nature, and it still is. But unfortunately, that nature is a bit too obscured by concrete, isn't it?
Oh yes, very much. I used to drive quite a bit in the morning. I used to have to go from Philothei, which was a leafy suburb, out towards the Kifisia direction, which is where the ancient Athenians and some modern ones would go for a bit of cool weather in the summer. And then I would have to drive all the way back into the centre of the city, and this meant going in towards the Nephos. To avoid it, I used to go off on a very rapid road up to Kesariani, which is on the slopes of Imitos. And there's a beautiful monastery there, very important, and important in the honey trade as well, as you point out.
Indeed, absolutely.
And there, I used to go up there to breathe in some fresh air.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Because that was the last opportunity before diving under the Nephos. But on one day, I went up there, and there was a sea fog rolling in, and it had mixed with the local Nephos. And the result was all of the traffic lights in Athens had been conked out.
Oh dear. Yes.
And all that was visible in Athens was the little church on top of Likavitos. Even the Acropolis was covered over. But so Athens really does have to work on its ecology.
Indeed,
for the sake of the inhabitants as well as of the monuments. Otherwise, there'll be things will be rotted away. And there's so much in Athens. There are 17 archaeological schools in Athens from all over the world. You could go every night of the week to a lecture about some aspect of what you have in your book.
But I mean, I think that on a positive side, that the antiquities of Athens, I mean, the Acropolis and the Agora, the wonderful Keramakos Cemetery have never been so beautifully displayed. I mean, the fact that, compared with in our time, the traffic roaring past the Acropolis is all gone. The lovely walkway, the Dionysiou Arbagitou, the road leading to the Acropolis. You can walk for a couple of hours
or cycling as well.
Cycling
is coming as well. I tried it once during the
Indeed,
Easter holidays one year when most of the population of Athens vamooses.
Indeed,
The motorways out of Athens are converted so that the traffic all goes on both in both sides of the road out of Athens. But I think the bicycle could do an awful lot to help people in Athens. Unlikely as it is, given that it has sometimes the heat has been known to go up into the high 40s.
Yes. You'd have to be brave, but nonetheless, it's yes. Winter cycling, winter swimming, winter cycling. Yes. But generally, I mean, I found, living in Monastiraki, as I did for several months at a time, I mean, it was just glorious to be able to go to the Roman Agora, to the ancient Agora, to wander around Plaka, Anafiotika. It was just a sheer delight to walk out of my apartment and enjoy the antiquities displayed as they never had been before in all their beauty.
Yes, I'm very envious, Bruce. I was living out, as I say, in one of the suburbs, but occasionally, in the shoulder seasons of the year when it wasn't too hot, I used to get a train and then go to the Theseo.
Indeed, yes.
And then walk around the foothills, so to speak, the pavement around, skimming around the north side of the Acropolis and into Anafiotika, and then down through, passing through Hadrian's Arch and looking up at the Temple of Olympian Zeus, an enormous building.
Absolutely, yes.
And you see these columns and you wonder how on earth did they have whatever it was, 160 of these columns. Took hundreds of years to do.
Well, of course, it lay uncompleted for about 700 years.
That's right. Yeah.
But yes, in the book you'll have seen that I make in describing kind of Othonian Athens, early Athens, I make a contrast between the royal palace, which was a great sort of top-down Bavarian construction, really not a very elegant building, but very, very much sort of planned from above and from abroad. And then, the few houses of Anafiotika, which emerged spontaneously. I mean, and then they were just, they'd been lived in, I think, by, workmen in Ottoman times, and then they were taken over by these workers from the Cyclades and made into comfortable dwelling places. So, you have the top-down construction, which is sometimes a bit heavy-handed, and you have the more spontaneous emergence of living spaces, which are much more human.
Yes. In fact, when they want to do television series of the Cyclades, they just go up to Anafiotika. It's much simpler.
That's right.
Logistically.
Yes. This is yes. I mean, because you immediately feel the Cyclades, and that's because it was actually sort of constructed as a little hamlet almost by workers from the tiny island of Anafi. That's right.
There are jewels in Athens.
There are, exactly. Yes.
For people who don't like going into huge museums like the National Archaeological Museum, which is a treasure house.
Indeed,
you have places like the Banaki and the Cycladic Museum.
Yes, indeed. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And even smaller museums too. Yes. Well, it's been a joy to talk about Athens in this place. We're looking over Carlingford Loch.
Indeed.
It is a little bit like, maybe the Sporades on a wet day. I remember my father as a seafarer in the Aegean in the early 70s. He clearly, saw echoes of the Connemara Islands, which he knew very well. So there, I do on certain sort of warmer days than this, I feel that I could be quite close to Greece. So anyway, a great pleasure to sit with you and talk about Athens and Greece. Anyway,
congratulations, Bruce. I wish you every happiness and success with your new book, and I look forward to reading the Greek language translation of it.
Yes,
I think the Greeks can learn a lot from that book as well.
Well, indeed, yes. Well, we can both check the translation, and I hope it'll be faithful.